Hello, everyone. We thought it would be interesting to get a group of people together who have been through multiple sets of craziness, crises, downturns in their life as an investor or entrepreneur. We have an amazing group. I'm going to intro them very briefly so we can jump into the content and spend the next hour together. I'm David Cohen, Techstars. We have 4 guests with us here that I'll introduce as we go through. And I'd like to ask each of you, as I sort of introduce you, to just give a little bit of context really quickly of what you've been through, what you've seen at a high level, sort of how it started, how it ended for you, and then we'll move through each person so everyone has context and then go through some actions that you've taken. So first, I'd like to introduce Scott Dorsey with High Alpha. That's a venture studio and fund. Scott was formerly, among other things, the founder and CEO of ExactTarget, which was acquired by Salesforce. Hey, Scott.
Yeah, hey David. Thanks for having me on the program today, and welcome everyone. So yeah, currently managing partner of High Alpha. We're a venture studio, focuses on starting new cloud companies and also investing in high growth cloud SaaS businesses as well. The experience I'll talk about today, I think that's most relevant, is prior to High Alpha, I started and led a marketing software company called ExactTarget. We were founded in early '01. So just a few months after existence, 9/11 struck. And then I think the crisis that probably had the largest impact on our business was the financial crisis of '08. We actually filed to go public in '07 and had to ride all the rockiness of the public markets and also the financial downturn in '08, '09. And I think there are probably some lessons, hopefully, that might be useful to this audience. So that'll be the time period that I focus on.
Thanks, Scott. We also have Bernee Strom with us. Resume is very long, but the highlights would be board director for many large companies, including Hughes, DirecTV, Polaroid, Infospace, founder of Gemstar, TV Guide, CEO at HD Radio, and much more. Hey, Bernee, tell us a little bit about what you've been through in your time.
Everything. So I've been through all of the downturns that you've listed, David. There was one particular one that I was truly impacted. The company was truly impacted, and that was Polaroid. We were in a board meeting on 9/11 in Boston, where one of the planes left from. And I can tell that story a little later. But it was very impactful for the company, and it taught me a lot of things. Also went through, of course, the internet bubble. In 2008 and 1987, and of course now, the difference between all of them and now is the other ones were, except for 9/11, were mostly financially driven. This one is pandemic driven, and it's very different. So, and the speed of change has been much faster than the other ones. So I look forward to talking to you. Yes, I've been a serial entrepreneur and sat on a lot of boards, so I've seen a lot of things. So thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be part of this group.
Thanks for taking the time, Bernee. We also have Paul Berberian, currently CEO at, Sphero, among other things, multiple things going on, formerly CEO at Raindance Communications, which was an IPO that Paul went through, among other ups and downs, Link VTC, and much more. Paul, share a little bit of what you've seen in your time.
So I experienced, as everyone here, since we are all wise individuals, I experienced my first trauma was the economic downturn. We call the internet bubble crash in 2000, and then 9/11 shortly thereafter. Both of those were with Raindance Communications, and then subsequently the economic downturn. I was in a mode of trying to start a business when the economic downturn happened, and just know what it feels like to be trying to fundraise while, as one friend said, it's like trying to sell your house in the middle of a tornado. It's a very tough thing to do. And then of course today was Sphero. So happy to share my experiences with any of those events, and try to draw some sort of correlation. 9/11 is perhaps the most interesting Brad and I were actually in New York City at the same time, not for the same reason. But it was an instant where everything, your life changed, you know, and the world changed instantly. And while we saw this tidal wave coming over the course of a couple of weeks, it very much so feels like something instant. And we know that going forward, the world will be forever different.
Thanks, Paul. The amazing thing about startups is somebody will sell their house in the middle of something like that, right? So there's always hopefully a way through.
Yeah, no, I want to sell mine now.
And last up, we have Brad Feld, of course, with Foundry Group, co-founder at Techstars as well, and investor for 25 years or so, board member across many well-known companies and entrepreneur in many contexts. Brad, what have you seen in your time high level?
Well, Paul referred to us as wise. I think that's a euphemism for old. And I know that none of us are really old because we sort of go back to 87 as the earliest, but there's plenty before 87 as well. I had just started my first company in Massachusetts in 1987. It's about 3 months old. And the Massachusetts Miracle, which some people may remember, was this huge economic boom in Massachusetts that ended in October on Black Monday when the stock market crashed. So I experienced that with my first business. I think Paul is smart to separate the internet bubble deflating and then bursting from 9/11. I think they were two separate events. And of course, after 9/11, there was also a very significant financial crisis as a result of fraud in 2002, 2003, 2004 among very large cap companies and telecom companies. So there was a string of things that for a stretch of about 3 or 4 years was extremely challenging. The financial crisis was a weird one for me. We raised Foundry Group in 2000, our first fund in 2007. And so we had somehow managed to raise a fund before the financial crisis hit, and then we were sort of investing into that. So it's mixed views there for me, although a lot of awareness of positive things that can come out of real crises and shocks. And then I like Paul's comment a lot about the difference between financial and other type of crises where, you know, financial crisis can be precipitated by something else, but oftentimes financial crises are independent. This does feel a lot to me like 9/11. My wife Amy and I were talking about it the other day, not the equivalent experience of 9/11, but the sort of countrywide shock of not having to deal with it and then all of a sudden having to deal with it. One difference between this and 9/11 that's just worth noting is that there was no advance awareness of 9/11. 9/11 was one of those things where it was a beautiful morning in New York City. The sky was blue, it was perfect. And then boom. This, we've had, 60 days of foreshadowing as individuals and as a country. And, it's kind of remarkable when you recognize how much we've geared into action, how much we squandered that 60 days. The optimistic side of that, though, at least for me, is that as a country, when America kicks into gear on something, we tend to kick into gear really, really, really fast. And it feels like we've done that now. So the optimistic side of me feels like at least we've kicked into gear now.
So I estimate that in our mutual networks, this video will end up in the hands of somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 individual startups that are out there in the network. So thank you for taking the time, everybody. I want to get into actions. And Scott, I want to start with you. When you think back to previous crises, downturns, the ones you feel are maybe most relevant to what's going on now, I'd love to hear some specific actions that you took quickly, maybe how those things turned out, or conversely, actions that you wish you would have taken that sort of negatively impacted you. I think that's what people are hungry for, is what should I be thinking about in this moment as a startup CEO?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, David. So to frame a little more the ExactTarget story, so we started in January of 2001, 9/11 hit. We were 3 co-founders, small, scrappy. We did the best we could to stay focused. We kind of had a mantra that we were not going to use 9/11 as an excuse for missing sales target or a software release. We were going to stay as focused as we could. And I think that served us well. I agree with all Paul's and Brad's comments. That was so stunning and shocking and unexpected. And you knew the world was never going to be the same. There actually are some meaningful parallels to where we are today. The ExactTarget journey was an amazing one. We ended up building a marketing software platform, marketing cloud platform that became really the standard in the industry. We went public in March of 12. We sold to Salesforce in summer of 13 for over $2.5 billion. So it was a amazing journey, a lot of ups and downs along the way. The end result was extraordinarily positive and very transformative for Indianapolis, and was a springboard for lots of other entrepreneurs in this community. So that was really quite wonderful. We filed to go public the first time in December of 07, and it was a time when small to medium-sized SaaS companies were going public, were getting liquidity. We were very thinly capitalized. We had only raised $6 million in capital, and we did $48 million in GAAP revenue in 07, 72 in 08, and we were ready to go public. So we filed in December of 07, and then the financial markets really got rocky in early 08. The IPO window closed. And then the big downturn hit in September and October. And I would describe that period as we had all the burden of being a public company with none of the benefits. We had reporting requirements. It was during a time where you had to file all of your quarterly numbers. It was a difficult time to kind of show our competitors everything that we were doing and really have the responsibility of being a public company without the capital or the halo you get as a public company. So we learned a lot about leadership, steadiness, pulling hard on the culture and relationship equity you had with your team. And in preparation for this call, I went back and I looked at all of our board decks in 08 and 09 to kind of sharpen my memory of what happened. And it was really interesting. We were very well positioned for the downturn for a couple of reasons. One, email and digital marketing was a faster, more affordable way for organizations to connect with their customers. We had a business that was a little bit recession proof, or a little bit recession resistant, probably a better term. And then secondly, we were in strong financial position. We were running the business at cash flow break even. We were profitable. So we were in an interesting position when that hit. What happened to our business though? Small businesses started to attrit. Our retention rate went down. We started churning small business customers. A lot of new customers that came on board would negotiate break up ability into their contracts where they could terminate for convenience. We had existing customers renegotiate the contracts. So we had a lot of pressure on the business, even though we were largely recession resistant. So what did we do? We paused hiring. We expanded our line with Silicon Valley Bank, our partner, to make sure we had the right capital to keep running the business. And we really doubled down on our existing customers. We shifted organizational resources to caring for customers, making sure they were healthy, making sure they were growing, and really trying to deepen those relationships. What we didn't do was any headcount reduction. We felt that we had a financially sound enough business and that we were adding a lot of value into the marketplace that we would be able to kind of weather the storm better than most. So interestingly enough, we stayed on file for all of 08. We really didn't want to pull the public offering. We thought that would be kind of a sign of weakness, sign of defeat. But early 09 rolled around and there was just no relief in sight. So we ended up raising outside capital, thankfully, from Battery, Scale, TCV. We pulled the IPO, and on the same day we pulled the IPO as when we announced the financing. And we ran kind of an internal campaign called Better Than an IPO, and we really started to get the team focused on what our future looked like. And a counterintuitive move we made is we kept headcount pretty steady, I would say, through Q1 and Q2 of 09. And then we saw an opportunity to really put capital to work and really accelerate our growth before our competitors kind of came back around. So it was kind of an example where we had good cash management practices. And then when we saw that the business was picking back up, I'd say we were a first mover to build sales capacity, double down on R&D, start expanding internationally. And breaking away and investing earlier than our competitive set actually gave us a big break in the market.
Awesome. So it sounds like a lot of cash management, a lot of rethinking the business.
Absolutely. And I think maybe the last thing I'll add too, David, is shifting our value proposition as well. So we ended up shifting our value proposition more around, you know, internet marketing and email and digital marketing was a more affordable, more economically savvy way to connect with your customers. So we're able to, I think, kind of gracefully shift our messaging and our value prop in a way that the market responded to. And I think that's important for all entrepreneurs to think about what are the opportunities in front of you and how will your business perform? How will your customers perform in this tougher time?
Awesome. Bernee, I want to jump over to you, maybe pick your favorite of the many things you've seen and talk about some actions that the company took that helped or didn't help in the moments that, you know, precipitated in the crisis.
I'll talk about 9/11 to start with. We were in a board meeting in Boston for Polaroid, and we're about to have the banks do a refi. Polaroid got into a lot of trouble in in the 50s, when Shamrock did a green mail and tried to take over the company, and they went into debt to pay off Shamrock and never recovered from the debt. So we were about to do a refi, and we were in the boardroom at 8:30. Somebody came into the room, whispered to the CEO, and we all walked down the hall to the TV in time to see the second plane go into the towers. And the next day, the banks pulled out of the refi. And so we had no choice but to go into Chapter 11. And the bankers went to look for buyers, and there were no buyers. So it looked like we were heading to Chapter 7. The week after 9/11, I flew to Boston, and that was an interesting experience. I think there were 3 people on the plane.
Wow.
There was no one traveling. And I flew to Boston, and I spent some time looking in the closets at the IP. I put together a business plan, and I started cold calling PE firms. I ultimately ended up in front of One Equity, which was Jamie Dimon's Bank One's private equity firm. And they ended up buying the company. They flipped it in 18 months and made a lot of money, because Polaroid had a lot of real estate in Route 128. I mean, we had a lot of assets. We had over 600 patents we had never done anything with. We had all kinds of assets. And so we sold the company, we saved the brand, the CEO got congratulated, and the bankers got the money. So, but I saved the brand. And so that had a huge impact on a company, a huge company impact. And I agree with Scott. I mean, you've got to harbor cash. You have to get your credit lines in place in these crises. For my other companies, I mean, that is so important. And so you asked us what was something we didn't do that we should have. Scott was lucky enough to keep his employees. But if you're in a startup and cash is a very scarce resource, you have to husband your forces. So we did have to do force reductions, and sometimes I don't think I did them fast enough, because you want to keep your people, you care for your people. And so I think in some respects we probably didn't reduce our force. And even more important, that once we did that, we had to take care of the survivors, because there was a lot of survivor guilt and then concern, would we make it or not? So having cash on hand is an important thing. I always say cash is queen.
Exactly. We use that exact phrase, Bernee.
Yeah.
So,
but you could use empress as well. But
yeah, I hear there, you know, thinking about the people, but also, you know, there's so much turmoil in the market that maybe other companies, you know, need to find an out, and maybe you could work with a different group that isn't working, or, you know, if your company's failing, obviously, you know, you want to try to do something about it, but there's turmoil in the market, so that creates opportunities for everyone.
Well, you know, what's the saying? You never want to waste a good crisis. I think that's what you're saying, and that's true too. Wherever there's trouble, there are opportunities. You just have to learn how to identify them. One other thing, the other very important thing is to really reach out to your customers. Just high touch and keep them in the loop. I think Scott was alluding to that as well, because you can upsell current customers. You can really take care of them. You don't want them to attrit. So you have to also take care of your customer base.
Second time I've heard the word attrit today. That's a new word for me.
I like that word, so I used it.
Brad, let you jump in. Do's and don'ts in this time. I know you've sent a note out to your portfolio, but obviously every situation is unique. But what's on your mind to share with action to take?
I'll add a slightly different dimension, which is communication. I think that it's important to recognize, especially as a leader, that everyone around you is experiencing a crisis. They're confused. There's huge amounts of uncertainty. The dimensions of pressure on the people that work for you and the people you work with are probably unfathomable to you in real time. And what you can do as a leader is lower any layer or any vector of ambiguity with the people that you lead by communicating regularly, especially communicating things as they change and unfold. A tactical example that we're doing at Foundry is, we've all shifted into this work from home world. The partners at Foundry are very comfortable with it because we work from all over the place. The people that work for us generally work in the office, so they're now all working from home. Whether or not you have a work from home culture or not, figuring out a way to get people together at least once a day so they see each other. So from 4:30 to 5 each day, Mountain Time, at the end of the day, we have an open line for everybody at Foundry. Just gets on the open line, talks about whatever they feel like talking about. People do email, but it's sort of a chance to hang out as though we're in a collective group. And then across our portfolio, we have the same thing for all the CEOs in our portfolio from 5 to 6. Anybody can join if they want. If nobody shows up, we have an hour to do whatever we want. But if people show up, there's a chance to engage with whoever shows up. That sort of ability to both not just communicate one way, here's what's going on, here's what's happening, here's what's changing, but give people a venue for human interaction on a continual, regular basis within a crisis, and recognize how inadequate, email missives are, and pronouncements and prognostications, but sort of that interaction. So that's one. The other side of that as a leader is to make sure you take care of yourself and you set the parameters for yourself. This week is probably an extreme intense week for everybody in the US because this is the week that the US really kicked into gear, right? Last week, there was a lot of that activity in certain cities like Seattle and San Francisco. They're probably a couple of weeks ahead of the rest of the country. In Colorado, certainly midweek last week was when things really started to go. And so right now, the level of intensity is extremely high. It will continue for a while. This will not be over on Friday. And so as a leader, you have to preserve your energy and you have to do things for yourself to create some parameters around everything. Everyone's different. The things I do is I always meditate first thing in the morning, but I've made a conscious decision that in addition to meditating, I'm going to exercise first thing in the morning. So kind of those two things before I look at my computer, before I get online, before I deal with anything. The other decision, we don't have kids, so I don't have that friction in my life, so I can spend a lot of time around that. But I've decided that I'm ending my day at 8 p.m. no matter what, so that I can have enough time before I go to sleep. I want to get enough sleep each night to allow myself to decompress some with Amy and just not do anything. So everybody has their own. If you have 3 kids and a spouse, you have 3 meals a day now, and you've probably got kids. If most of the schools are closed, you got kids around all day trying to figure out what to do with them. If you got college kids, they're home with you. Like figuring out how to build some rhythm into that as a leader for yourself, separately even from your family, so that all of that extra time is not just care and feeding of your family, but that you can actually have enough time for yourself. The other thing, which I would say, and Paul and I shared this experience in 9/11, where we were both in New York for different reasons. We ended up with a third friend, Paul's CFO, a guy named Nick Cacciaro, literally going to a friend of mine's house, a woman named Jenny Lawton, who folks in Techstars know well, stealing Jenny's car. She lived in Connecticut. We took our car and we drove our car back to Boulder in this sort of 28-hour sprint to get home because we just badly wanted to get home. And that was a really powerful bonding experience for us. And it was a lifelong one for certainly for me and Paul. I ran into Nick recently, randomly, after not seeing him for many years. And like that same bonding experience still existed. So sort of know emotionally that there are lots of things in this crisis that you can do with people that will last for a long time with you, and let that be energy that fuels you rather than burden on you. I like to say, somebody said it to me a long time ago, when you're concentrating just on yourself, it's very, very hard. You feel stressed and anxious about everything. When you start concentrating on the people around you, you're still stressed and anxious, but some of that stress and anxiety comes down because you can take action with people around you.
I think that's very true. I think communication is critical, like Brad does. I also think that as a leader, no matter what you're feeling inside, you have to project calm and confidence, because your people every day come in and look at you. And if you look anxious and worried, they pick it up instantly. So you could be ready to puke inside, but you have to project this calm and competent stance that you know that you're in control, and you know how to take care of people, and you care about them, and you communicate to them. And I think that's hypercritical.
I'd add a minor footnote to that. I think that today, especially in the context of people being more comfortable in certain cultures, business cultures with vulnerability and leaders being vulnerable, I think in addition to being calm, I think that's powerful and important. I think it's also powerful to express your true emotions, but without dramatizing them.
That of drama, yeah.
Without the drama. Like, I am really scared right now. Here's the things I'm scared about.
You're telling truth. You're communicating truth.
That's right. You're communicating with, oh my God, ah! Like, that's not helpful, right? But to express clearly, you know, I'm feeling pressured because my parent is, or my child is, or I have uncertainty about our business on this dimension, but we're working on it. But I feel some anxiety around that. I think, again, based on whatever your culture is, in addition to the calmness, linking in that authentic sort of self reinforces, I think, people's confidence that you as a leader can get things done.
Yeah, you have to tell truth. You can't paint a rosy picture if there's not a rosy picture to paint, but you have to do it calmly.
Paul, I'm going to ask you to jump in on whatever topics on your mind. It could be this leadership topic, which I know companies want to know about, or actions to take, not take. What's unsaid and on your mind right now?
So I'll focus on two things that haven't been said. One is, I mean, first of all, the conversation has been fantastic. It's great just to get a reminder, just to listen. So all of you 5,000 to 10,000 startups, you know, pay attention. So I'm going to focus on two things. So after 9/11, so Raindance was a conferencing company, you know, very similar to Zoom, web conferencing, voice conferencing, and we were public at the time, small cap, barely eked out during the dot-com bubble burst, but we managed to kind of stay in the registration process long enough and eke out during a small window in the summer of 2000, and then 9/11 happened shortly thereafter. And so everyone would think like our business would soar after 9/11 because, you know, no one could travel, and so they're all going to need to have conferencing. And we certainly did see an uptick in that business, but it's the thing I want to talk about is, you know, look for the opportunities in your business that could potentially take advantage of the crisis and provide a solution that will really empower people's lives. It was incredibly rallying for our team, who just went through a restructure after we went public, and then we let go of a bunch of people because the economy was continuing to get worse. And so that was challenging. But to be able to show your ability to help the world with your product and services is incredibly rewarding for the team to get them back onto mission. And that was super helpful to us. It didn't save the company in terms of, generate a huge amount of economic return. It was a 20% boost in whatever the standard run rate of the business is. But I also want to say, don't try to jump through unnatural hoops to create something that that just isn't going to fit within your organization, because you're gonna run a bunch of cycles to run your company to create something that will be perhaps inferior to people who actually, that is their whole business, just to get clobbered in the market. Stay focused on what you're really good at. We were a conferencing company, so it was easy to just deliver more conferencing. So look for those opportunities. Like for example, with Sphero right now, we're not a distance learning company, right? We actually, are excited about kids getting together and using robots to learn how to code. And it's a hands-on collaborative experience. And while we have toyed with creating some distance learning, we just can't spin that up in 2 weeks and become a distance learning company overnight. And I've resisted a lot of inbound requests from us to do an incredible high G turn, stop the presses, redirect all the engineers onto something brand new that ultimately, is years of development to get really a fantastic offering there. And so we're trying to stay focused on what we're really good at and make sure we're there to deliver the solutions when the world settles down. The second thing I want to point out is probably something that's not fun to talk about in a moment of crisis, but I'm going to reflect on it personally, and it's something that I want to share, and it's around this notion of failure in a time of crisis. In 2008, from 2006 to 2010, I was in this 2007 to 2010, I was in this zone of trying to launch a new company. And I had several efforts going on during that time. And I put a tremendous amount of energy into getting something off the ground, doing angel financing, doing doing a whole bunch of pitches. I had a clean tech startup in there, and we did all kinds of pitches. But in many ways, we were pushing against a rope. There was so much friction in the fundraising environment that it was a lot of false hopes and wasted energy that really took a huge toll on my family life. And if I were to go back and say, what would I wish I would have done? I wish I would have redirected my energy at that time to help existing companies and provide some sort of advisory or board or some sort of service there, versus trying to spin something out of nothing in that moment in time, because I think it just created a lot of friction in my family life. And so it's always hard to kind of wrestle with the fact that you might not have a business that's going to make it through a tough time. And these were fledgling ideas. Clean tech was really hard after 2008, 2009 timeframe. That it just, false hope is really a difficult thing to deal with, right? And so it's just being brutally honest with yourself and saying, are you still enjoying the fight and the struggle, right? Because running a business is a struggle, right? There's no, you want to get to the top of that mountain. And so some businesses are like just walking up the side of a hill, and some are you're climbing K2, and some are just impossible peaks that you can climb. And it all depends on the weather and all the external circumstances. And just try to be really, try to really assess what's going on to see if it's worth the struggle, or if you can redirect your efforts to something else that would be way more satisfying to you personally. that was a particularly challenging time in my life. And, you know, when it resolved when things started getting better in 2010. But I spent a solid 3 years trying to find a gig.
Yeah, that 2008 was a really tough time. VC's hair was on fire, and Brad, yours has grown back very nicely. But it's hard to find venture funding when everybody's portfolios are going down the tubes. So I was starting a company then too, and ended up doing a big angel round from friends. And it was a tough time, very tough time. You just have to do, if you have a company that you want to do and you know it's right for the times, you just have to do whatever you have to do to try to make it work.
So the topics that came in from some of the founders that I know we have about 20 minutes left, and I just sort of open it up for thoughts on these things. Y'all are starting to hit on leadership. And I think, Brad, you talked a bit about doing something for yourself, which was one of the questions that we had. But, you know, more on leadership around, you know, sort of how to actually talk to your team, help them with this crisis. Or also a big set of questions we get is around fundraising and M&A. So just to throw that out as fodder for whoever has thoughts. You know, a lot of people are trying to raise rounds. Maybe they have an M&A deal in progress. What are your thoughts around those type of activities, you know, at sort of entering a crisis like this?
I'd love to take one more shot at the leadership topic if I could, maybe just kind of building on some of the earlier comments. So I believe Zoom is going to become kind of an iconic company in this moment. You know, it's really interesting, Paul, you kind of referencing Zoom and your experience, you know, decade past in the world of video, but, you know, Eric and the team at Zoom have built an amazing company. And I think this is like their moment where they're becoming an iconic company, and we're all learning how to work remotely more effectively and using tools that are in place and taking greater advantage of them. So we did a call yesterday with a good majority of our CEOs. First time we've had a Zoom call with 25, 30 CEOs at one time. And it was remarkable. You know, you had the little Brady Bunch tiles where you kind of, you know, see everyone. And to Brad's point, you know, you actually have an opportunity to connect with people in a more human way, in more almost human, authentic, empathetic way. And I'll tell you, the experience I had yesterday was just remarkable. We had one CEO feeding his newborn daughter. We had a couple other ones with a dog or a cat in their lap. You know, all of a sudden you got a personal view into their world, and it just filled me up and filled all of us up. We were just so happy to see one another, and we really focused the call on kind of three dimensions. One is just taking care of yourself, and I think Brad touched on that beautifully. Nothing's more important for a leader than really taking care of themselves and making sure that they're healthy and clear-minded and bringing their very best to the workplace. Second is around just communication and clarity with your team and managing their anxiety. And then third is thinking critically about your business, about cash management, about lines of credit, about should you be shifting your strategy, should you be shifting even your product roadmap of what you're building. So those are the kind of three dimensions we talked about. But my biggest learning from going through the financial crisis and leading companies through tough and rocky times is I think it's all about authentic communication, and whatever level of communication you think you're having with all your constituents is probably not enough. That would be my biggest piece of advice for founding CEOs and entrepreneurs is think about all constituents. Bernee mentioned customers, investors, employees. Being open, transparent, and communicating in a really frequent and authentic way is of critical importance. And thankfully today we have a tool set where we can do that extraordinarily well in Zoom and lots of other tools that help the remote worker really achieve their best. There are ways to make that communication two-way, very authentic. And I think the way I'm looking at it for High Alpha and our portfolio companies, this is going to be a tough storm to weather for a long, long time, but really looking at where are the opportunities to get better, to get sharper, to be more focused, to work on the most relevant work in front of you and communicate maybe in ways that you've never achieved before with your team. You know, there's an opportunity mindset that I think entrepreneurs, if they apply to the right way, in the right way to their team and their business, they can come out even healthier on the other side.
Yeah, I'm on a board of a public company in Seattle, and it's really hard to fundraise right now. And we really reduced the force a lot. But what's amazing to me in tech, and tech is unusual because people are very happy to take lower salaries or no cash compensation in some respects. You find that they really believe in the vision and the product. Tech companies have a unique ecosystem, and your employees become very loyal and very committed to get the thing done. And we're fighting hard at this company to stay relevant and not have to do strategic alternatives. And it really amazed me what the workforce was willing to do to keep the company going and alive. And this company has cutting edge technology in nano pico production and consumer LiDAR and automotive LiDAR, so that we're really cutting edge, and there's a lot of IP, and they're just so committed to getting this out that they'll do anything. It really amazed me.
I think one thing to sort of recognize around both financings and M&A is there's a big difference between you haven't started, you're in a process, and you've got a signed deal that you're trying to close. Those three things are different. Against the backdrop of those three things, there's a lot of, I don't have the right phrase for it, I'll use a bad one that's overused, situational awareness that unfolds on a daily basis. And it unfolds at lots and lots of different levels, right? If the company that's trying to buy your company is an airline, you can probably assume that that deal's not going to happen. However, there are plenty of deals that are in process that probably will happen. And the dynamics of what plays out over the next week or two or three or four will affect how people think about what they're going to do. Interestingly, there's an enormous, in this particular cycle, there's an enormous amount of available cash for private equity firms and for venture capital firms and for public companies, especially in tech. And one of the challenges for many of those companies in acquisitions for the last 12 to 24 months has been that things are just too expensive. And so there may actually be opportunities that are unexpected as a result. They'll be at lower prices than they might have been, but the appetite for it does not necessarily correspond to the thing that's happening. And so if you take those three segments, if you're in a deal that's on the path to closing or you're trying to get it closed, drive forward aggressively, and their communication with the buyer is key. Because when deals don't close, they usually don't close because there's not communication happening between the principals. And then suddenly the principal on one side of the deal hears the deal's off. But if you're talking with your counterparty at the principal level on a daily basis, it's much harder for them to just pull the rug out from under the deal without at least signaling that things are changing so that you have some ability to understand it. If you're in a deal process, but you're not to a deal, again, financing and M&A is the same here, I think, you have a lot of risk. People that are looking at deals this week, there's plenty of noise. Some people are looking a lot more, some people are looking a lot less. Yeah. There's a joke that went around VC Twitter the other day. Somebody said, I got nothing to do here all day but sit on Zoom and meet with companies. And like that person clearly doesn't have an existing portfolio that they give a shit about.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think there's a lot of work people need to do on the investor side. And so the activity around actually new deals versus shoring up your existing companies and understanding what to do, there's a lot of chaos around that right now. But again, situational awareness, that may change in a week or two, depending on how things unfold. It might get better, it might get worse. If you haven't started a process yet, you probably should wait 30 days. You should probably focus on the things that are under your control versus trying to get people's scarce attention on other things in places where they're stressed. And that could also be true if you've just started a process. Like, understanding where best to put your time against this is important. And at the same time, just paying attention to what's going to change, because 30 days from now, things could be a lot worse, or they could be a lot better. And 60 days from now, ...
Yeah, that's really great advice, Brad. I would add, often whether it's M&A or venture, I think, I kind of think of it across three components. One are kind of price and terms. Second is speed, and third is certainty. And I think, as an entrepreneur, when you're either selling your business or raising capital, you're trying to balance all three dimensions, kind of terms, speed, and certainty. We're in an environment now where I think entrepreneurs really need to optimize speed and certainty. And that really speaks to Brad talking about, if you have something in process where you have a trusted relationship, you have a high communication frequency, there's mutual intent to get something done, index a little more on speed and certainty, and maybe even a little less on terms in order to get something done. Otherwise, this is a time where you could just waste so many cycles of work and energy if the other party or other parties you're working with aren't really committed and they're highly distracted. I actually saw a couple deals over the last day or two with entrepreneurs where they felt like they kind of already had their syndicate locked in. They were still exploring new conversations, and my advice was just lock it down. Don't waste a lot of cycles on new conversations. Drive to the hoop. Really try to get it done if you've already got support and you have people that you've been building a relationship with for quite some time.
I think this is huge, Scott. A lot of the companies that will see this are pretty young, and many of the entrepreneurs are first or second time, and they've never seen a time when raising $1 million on 7 was such an insult, or wasn't such an insult. The way they think about it is, that's just the way it is, right? Raising $1 million on 3 pre is such an insult, and you may see some movement on those terms. And I think I've heard a few times cash is king, so get the deal done.
Cash is queen.
Yeah, I mean,
Queen, yes, queen.
cash is queen.
Well, we have to balance it out.
Yeah, and I've been on both sides of that, like having to price at a very low price to get $1 into a deal. And you know what? It's always funny, like there's a young set of CEOs where they're saying, well, make sure you're really careful on who your investors are, and you have choices, and really the choice as the entrepreneur is whoever's willing to invest is a good investor, by and large, assuming you're not talking to loan sharks and things like that. And so I think the advice is dead on. Like, if you have people engaged and they're interested, get the deal closed, because otherwise you might have 100% of zero, which won't get you anywhere.
The other thing, Paul, it's really interesting when you think about, the old adage of time kills deals. Boy, we're living in an environment where every day is remarkably different than the previous day. And I think it's just an amazing lesson for any dimension of business where you're trying to get something done. It could be a new sale, could be a new partnership, could be funding, could be ultimately selling the company. You have to optimize for speed and realize that things can change very, very quickly. I don't believe any of us would have imagined the world would change as quickly as what we've seen over the last 30 to 60 days, or even the last few days in the United States. But that is a backdrop, I think, can drive entrepreneurs toward being very decisive and really optimizing for time and speed. That's so important.
Yeah, it's optimizing for time and speed, and not necessarily the highest valuation. Yeah. I mean, I always say you take the money when the market's willing to give it to you. You take it and you close it and you have it in the bank, and then you could focus on your company. But if you don't have any money in the bank, then you don't have a company. So it's hard, but you got to bite the bullet and do it.
I'd add to this, especially for younger companies that have existing investors, but also for mature companies, a thing that you can do today, or probably tomorrow since it's the end of the day, is reach out to your existing investors and understand how much capital they have available for you. The likely source of short-term capital for you, if you are not about to close the financing, is from your existing investors. And even if you don't need money immediately, understanding which of your existing investors have capital for you, knowing that that will change. It's not a commitment on their part, but just understanding, where they sit. And if it's a venture firm, understanding how they're thinking about it. This is a good moment in time to say, all right, I don't need to raise money till, we've got money till September. I probably don't need to raise money, start for another month or two, but I just want to make sure I understand, how much money you have available to us, what the process would be, and sort of what you think we should do. Give me some advice on how to think about what our next round of financing should look like. Investor by investor, by the way, including all your individual and angel investors, just understanding that there's a huge difference between having no knowledge of what money's available from your existing investors, having zero, knowing that zero is available. That's useful. It's not fun, but it's useful. But then also knowing sort of which ones of them could write checks and what those magnitude of checks would be.
Yeah, and I would say that in this time of such uncertainty and such volatility, you take the money when the market's willing to give it to you. So if you want to accelerate that next round or extend the current round, I would get as much cash as I could get when the market's willing to give it to you, because you don't know when that's going to close or stop. And it's like you said, the company that was going to sell to an airline, maybe they should buy the airline at this point because things have switched around. But you have to take advantage of opportunities as they come, and that has to do with financing. You take the money when the market's willing to give it to you.
I want to try to wrap in the last few minutes. One more topic that I think is we touched on a little bit, but it's a hard one. And I think a lot of the folks watching are wondering about it. Specific to employees, cash conservation, layoffs, furloughs, hiring freezes. Is this always a good idea? Talk to me a little bit more about how you think about this as a leader based on your experience, whoever wants to jump in, because this is a thing that they all ask about.
Yeah, I'll start because I've had a handful of recent experiences having to make this decision. I think the first thing you have to do is you have to approach it with a great deal of compassion. I don't think you can be cavalier about it. I think you have to be very serious when you talk to your leadership team about it, because you don't want people to get into the mindset that this is ever easy, or you're not going to have a dramatic impact on someone's life, especially in a time of great uncertainty like this. So I think you need to set the tone as the leader, that this is a very big decision. But you also have to, remind them that the business needs to survive, right, at all costs. That should be your main focus until until another conversation happens with your investors or board that says that you shouldn't. So you need to always think about preservation of the company and the employees that will remain. I think once you mentally come to the decision that is something that needs to happen, then my experience has been is move as quickly as possible, move at an uncomfortable pace for your leadership team. They will want more time to assess. They'll want more time to get the paperwork in place. But as soon as you guys mentally commit that this is something that needs to happen, it's just going to be this huge weight on your shoulders that you're going to be carrying around until you actually make it. And there's this adage saying, always cut deeper than what you think you need to cut. I think that's a generally true statement, but every business is a little different. I've always found that a modest cut of like 10% is sometimes inflicts more trauma to the organization than a big cut, because it injects a lot of uncertainty. And I think if you have a healthy evaluation process of employees, you can get rid of 10% of non-performers versus doing some big event. But if you need to cut, 30, 40% of your company rapidly, get your team, get them seriously focused on it, execute it quickly, communicate with your board, understand the steps you can take to really help the team that remains, but also put a concentrated effort to help the team that you're saying goodbye to actually find their next gig, provide some level of assistance there, open up your network, try to do it as gracefully as possible, and then very quickly get your core team together and get them refocused on the mission of running the business. But this is a very, there's a lot of companies that probably weren't thinking about doing a massive restructure of the organization, and and then 2 days later they're now having to contemplate it. If you fall into that case, my advice is pause, gather a couple more days worth of data, be clear-headed about it, go to your closest direct reports that help form your leadership team, and start having that sober conversation now. But give yourself a little bit of time to process it, but then move quickly once you guys conclude that that's something you need to do.
The last thing Paul said, I think, is really key, is making sure you move very quickly once you've made a decision, but that you be deliberate with urgency, but not with overreaction to getting to a point, and recognize that there's multiple tools here. One tool is a RIF, where you actually lay people off. Another tool is a salary reduction, where you temporarily reduce salaries, and of course the CEO and the leaders of the company should be the most significant of that, but it's something that you can lead through, and a lot of people, like Bernee mentioned it earlier, people committed to the company, that's a tool worth using, especially in a temporary cycle. You can also do a furlough, and there's different legal implications around that, but it's another way of navigating through it. And then last, it's worth noting that there's a bunch of regulatory activity, both at the federal level, state level, both old and then new, with some of the bills that are coming, especially if you have employee bases over 50 or 100 people. So just make sure that you're very tuned into whatever the regulatory activity is, so that you can maneuver within the context of whatever that is as it's unfolding.
Thank you, guys. We've been about an hour. This is unfolding very quickly. It's March 17th as we record this. Craziness will continue to ensue for a while, hopefully not too long. This has been really valuable as an asset. It's a fast-moving situation. As you all know, we had another panelist that was going to join us, but she, as of today, is actually dealing with COVID-19 in her home. So we wish her the best. And, things are going to change and be crazy for all of us. So thank you for taking the time, Bernee, Brad, Paul, Scott, super helpful. I appreciate it. And y'all stay safe. Let's do like a virtual fist bump or something, I think, for everyone.
Oh, well.
Take care.